Heidi ho, good neighbors.
Hey,
Are we
everybody.
on? And we look like we're... I'm going to make people jealous here.
How are you with your sweeties?
What's this called?
The Smarties.
Yeah.
Rustling?
No, there's like this...
Temptation? Irritation?
Irritation. No, my daughter at school, for some reason, like one of her teachers, like they were supposed to have this quiet time, and then they play these tracks of like... I thought it was like...
down the, like fingers down
I thought it was torture, and they're like, no, it's like this craze of like listening to these like crunching rappers, and there's like a title for it. If you know...
Is it white noise? Is it?
No, there's a title for it.
I have no idea, but it sounds, it sounds like something that they would do in schools today. I this sudden realization, like I have no clue what schools look like anymore. Like when was the last time I went to a school? Actually, I did coach in Michigan, I guess, but I'm like, do they still do chalkboards? Is that still a thing?
I don't know. It depends on the school.
Huh. I pictured all being like laser effects and white like stuff now, and white boards and.
I'm the one with gray hair, but you're making yourself sound really old.
I'm older than you.
I know you are.
I know. And I
contrary to popular belief.
For those of you that are connected-ish to South, if you're watching, I have this beautiful scar on the top of my head, somewhere over here. And I keep saying to people I should say it's like mixed martial arts or something like that. It was actually just bizarrely, it was a skin cancer spot. And so I had it out, and so suddenly I'm like, I turned 40, and that week the Queen died, and I got skin cancer. I was like, what happened?
My goodness.
That was like a week and a half.
That's an intense. I'm sorry. I'm like totally chewing in everyone's ear on the podcast.
But people like that these days, so just
it's a craze. All the cool kids are doing it.
Wow. So before we completely lose everybody.
Yes, today's episode is really exciting. We get to talk about a subject that everyone loves talking about, which is sexuality.
Uh-huh.
And you preached a message on Sunday. And we're gonna solve all of the problems today.
And it's
tune in.
Fascinating, like as a precursor, like some of my history with conversations around sexuality has been in pastoring churches. I've actually said verbatim, I'm not going to make this a major issue because I don't think it's a major issue. And then as I wrestled a little bit with like how early in the story sexuality appears, I'm like, maybe it is a major issue. Maybe it's bigger than I give it credit for it sometimes. And I don't know if that's like some of like, I'm a heterosexual guy that's only dated one woman seriously my entire life.
Same. We both just qualified ourselves.
Yeah, we're just like, so.
I've only been on one date.
Both white,
with one woman.
You've been married to one person. So on that level, like, so it's fascinating to me. As we get into this text we'll look at today, Paul implicates all of us in brokenness around sexuality. Even if you're just only married to one person, only ever had sex with one person, very much in a just a monogamous heterosexual sort of lifestyle. Like, still, there's an implication for every one of us that all is not well.
Yeah.
And Jesus does that beautifully with his whole, like, hey, you've heard people say don't commit adultery. I'm telling you, even if you look at a woman in the wrong way, look at a guy in the wrong way, that's implicating you in this whole thing.
Totally.
So there's a broadness to the whole sexual ethic of Paul. And so we've wrestled a little bit with what direction do we go here in this conversation? Because
there's like, it's such a hot button issue that we could talk a dozen different directions and it cover probably, well, there's entire podcasts about this.
But yeah,
a whole series of podcasts about
and
this.
we had Carolyn Schmidt read for us the text we looked at this Sunday, and so it's nearly 2 chapters, and that was just profound to have her at 80 read this text. And yet I said a couple
she looks no more than 35.
No more than 35. I said a couple of times in the sermon, there's something about the one verse, which is just 7 English words and only 2 Greek words, that I spent most of my energy wrestling with those 2 words. Most of my thoughts and fears about what the sermon could be, about how people could respond to it. And anytime you do an address or a speech or a sermon on something that is a hot button issue, there's always going to be those responses. Almost all of my emotional energy went on those 2 words. and the
What two
potential.
words are you talking about, Alex?
Yeah, so in actual fact, in Greek, we would need to pull them up because I can't remember them off the top of my head.
I'm working on it, but keep talking.
Makaloi and arsenokoite, which in Greek literally mean effeminate and those that use a male-only bed. Which like when you for those of you who aren't familiar with the world of Greek language, generally what you do is you try and find in the Bible other contexts where the word's used, and you try and find other places in literature where it's used when you're not sure what it means. And the second one just doesn't exist anywhere before Paul. It's like he made it up. So when you want to do the deep, honest wrestling with the text, you're like, okay, like at some point we just started translating that as homosexuality. It could be accurate, and it could not be.
Yeah, and there's like scholars who would say this is a well-known figure of speech in the day, maybe, but there's limited.
But we can't find it anywhere. Yeah.
So there's
so it only gets used as Paul uses it. But I think the bigger thing to me with wrestling with the text was, we know what Paul comes with as a mindset. He comes from a very Jewish world, where Jewish people were just not like Greeks and Romans. Like, it was very unpromiscuous.
Yeah.
At least on the surface. Like Greek and Romans had promiscuity everywhere. The Jewish people, if it was promiscuous, it was behind
the scenes.
Behind the scenes.
Which you use this quote that Americans are prudes on the surface and
perverts
underneath. And there's some truth to that. So, all right. So on today's episode, we're obviously having this conversation about all these different things, but I feel the need to pause and say that part of our conversation is, why is this such a big deal? You just said something that's really fascinating. You said we have almost 2 full chapters was your text for Sunday, and 2 Greek words ate up the majority of your mental energy and study time.
And maybe 50% of the sermon.
Yeah, and and about half the sermon. What's up with, how did we get here? How did we get to the place where this has become, homosexuality, our sexual expression, sexuality in general, has become such a hot topic in culture and in the church? Or honestly, it's almost like in the church, it's like this weird thing where it's a really hot topic and no one talks about it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
How can it be a hot topic that no one talks about? I don't know, but we're doing it.
I think one, like we're mostly aware, whether you would class yourself as more conservative, more liberal, you're probably aware of a shift in the last 5 years. Like it's shifted more in the 5 years. It's probably been shifting longer. Where conversation around sexuality has just changed. Like the number of people outside of church worlds that would say, no, I'm comfortable with certainly at least monogamous same-sex relationships. The support statistically for gay marriage is fairly high outside of the church. So I think that
and increasingly in the church,
but as we'll talk about in a second, statistically in evangelical churches, that may not be quite as true. So somewhere like for the whole of the world, the human society, or Western society, there's been an increasing shift in that. No, we're okay. Like whatever you want to do, that's up to you. Like that sort of approach has become has become more and more common. Now at the same time, like fascinating, we talked about this piece of research that in the evangelical church, a couple of questions were asked by Barna as a search group, and one of those questions was, how many of you believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ? And the answer was what? Do you remember the number?
I don't remember.
68% or something like that?
I didn't read the study, but I
think if 68% said, I believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. People were asked, how many of you believe that homosexuality is wrong or has no place in the church? And it was in the 90s.
Yeah, so let me translate that in my own words. What you're saying is, and by the way, this study, it wasn't just like random people who self-proclaimed as evangelical. They actually had to take a quiz
to
qualify as an evangelical. So we were talking about people who actually took a quiz and came up as genuinely they know what it means to be an evangelical.
Yeah.
And then those people, 40-something% of them didn't even believe in one of the most core theological principles of the Christian faith. But 90% of them instantly could tell you that homosexuality is bad.
So the fascinating thing to me was like, it feels like so belief has started to get lost in amongst what we might call ethics. Like there's an ethical point of view and perhaps even a political point of view that would say a particular thing, and that's more our focus now than a core theological belief around who Jesus was and what he said about himself. Like that feels like the evangelical church is starting to split a little bit into perhaps more of a political entity in some ways than it is a spiritual one. Like
I was listening. I was listening to a podcast just recently, and they were talking about like when you call yourself an evangelical nowadays, it's really difficult to even get a definition because there's an evangelical movement that's like hyper politicized, where like you can't call yourself that unless you're super right and you're voting for these types of characters. Then there's a evangelicalism that's actually defined by the quadrilateral we talked about,
Dave Bebbington.
Bebbington's quadrilateral.
Bebbington.
And that's more of a classic evangelical, which is where, some people would fit. And they're like, so what, is it even a thing anymore?
What even is it?
What are we talking about? Is it like your ethics? Is it your theological framework? Is it how much you want to talk about Jesus? Is your hold to the scriptures? Is it your
invitation to follow Jesus specifically and concretely, which we don't do every single week at South? Totally. Like the Billy Graham crusade model of, no, we're going to make that intentional invite every single week. Mm-hmm. You're right. There's so many different questions. And so I think in the church, there's like this holding on to this ethic as an important part of, if we let that go, where does society go? Like, where does the church go? Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, people feel more comfortable letting the divinity of Jesus go than
which is a foundational thing to our
which is
salvation,
very foundational. So I am intrigued by hearing voices of wrestling with this subject in the church, and I feel like people are torn between two things. Like there's a desire to be intellectually honest and wrestle with a text. To take this text that we believe God has given us as a framework for faith. Mm-hmm. God has spoken through this text to wrestle with it honestly and say, this is what it says and this is what it means. And a desire to connect with people that are outside of the faith world, perhaps, or certainly outside of the classic Christian ethic of sexuality. And to feel like they can offer something to those people that invites them into that story.
I might even make it more complicated than that.
Okay, I love it. But let's make it more complicated.
In the sense that it's not just wanting to not say something scary so that we have an invite. It's also a tension between the clear teaching of Jesus around the ethic of love.
Yeah.
And acceptance. And these are very Jesus ideas. Like, even in Corinthians, we're gonna hit in this book.
Let me tell you a more excellent way.
He like spends an entire chapter unpacking this framework of the kingdom of God, which is seated on love, on this sort of idea, and then they're wrestling with that, and that sounds good and fun and great. And then there's this sexual ethic that comes up, which feels antithetical to a lot of what's going on in culture, and they're like, how do I retain both of these at the same time? And so have a foundation of love for everyone, and the easy out is to say, well, I accept everyone, but I also think that they're really, really bad if they're doing this.
Yes,
and it starts to create a cognitive dissonance for followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
So the problem is, the Bible says both of these things. What in the world do we do with them?
Yes. So I think what Jesus does wonderfully well, which is it's probably the reason so many of us find him so captivating, Jesus can, it seems, concretely disagree with someone and make them feel loved at the same time. Like that is something that he does very well. Now, there's groups that hate him, clearly, and he seems to drive people one of two ways, but there are all these people that he engages with that have ethics that are completely different to his and enjoy sitting having meals with him. Like that's a rarity. So there's something that he brings, and then he's still comfortable in the midst of encountering them, saying, I have a better way for you to be human.
Totally.
Like that is, and that pericope, that story we looked at this week, was the woman caught in adultery. Like fascinating little text, and actually been like questioned. Was it in the original manuscripts? In some versions, it's in italics for some reason. But seems so Jesus-like. A woman's dragged in front of him. He asks this great question about anyone who's guilt-free, come cast the first stone. Like, let's go. We're going to do this together.
He draws in the sand, and we don't know what he draws, but there's one of the theories is that he's like writing out the sins of all the people, but who knows, but
Bill did this on this day. It's like,
and they're like, drop that rock.
Yeah. Ooh, and everyone's looking at Bill. Do we stone Bill now? No, but this guy did this, and and they all disappear, and Jesus is left, and he says, "No, I'm not going to cast a stone, but go and sin no more." Like it's a compelling ask.
You're like, oh, go and sin no more. Oh, that's a massive, invasive, life-changing statement.
And potentially complex. Yeah. So potentially so complex. Like someone said to me, like, just in terms of where society was in the first century and the underbelly of Jewish society, which probably was as seedy as the Roman world in some ways. Perhaps the reason Jesus spent so much time with prostitutes is there were just lots of prostitutes. And we're not sure whether that's the category she fits into, but it seems like she could be. So the complexity of go sin no more, what does that look like? So this pushes us towards the some of our tension, I think, with sexuality. I had a friend when I was in Michigan. We used to work with a bunch of guys in the poorest zip code in Detroit, 48202, Rosa Parks, North End. This area that had become run down, dilapidated, primarily a black community. A lot of gentrification had happened, which caused its own issues. And one of the discipleship guys we worked with had been spending time with a young guy in his 20s. Was a drug dealer. And this guy in their relationship, he said to Nate, the guy that was doing the discipleship, he said, so I've become convinced Jesus is who he says he is. Like the divinity thing I'm locked in on. Like I'm 100% Jesus is who he said he is. And I'm supposed to follow him. The problem is I make $800 a week selling crack. And I have 4 kids and a wife. And I get free healthcare because the government thinks I'm unemployed. And I get a bridge card because the government thinks I'm unemployed. For us to not starve, I need to find a $40,000 a year job to not sell drugs. And I didn't finish high school. I dropped out when I was 14. There are no $40,000 a year jobs for people like me. What does Jesus want me to do? Was his question. What does he want me to do? So every time Jesus says to someone, go and sin no more, there's a complicated outworking of that. And the problem I think that we land on is for some of us, again, 2 self-confessedly very white guys who've only slept with one person. When we started to follow Jesus at whatever age, I was 18 when I really decided to follow Jesus. The things that I felt I had to give up were maybe I'm not going to sleep around, which I hadn't done anyway. Or I'm not going to go out and get wasted, which I wasn't really doing that much anyway. Like there was little sacrifice, if I'm honest, to following Jesus.
Yeah, and I happen to be surrounded by a lot of Christians, so there's actually a lot of benefits to me. Oh, Aaron, the cool kid who's decided to be a Jesus follower and works really hard in the church. And it was actually a very self-serving move for me. So we feel that there is some complexity, but not woman caught in adultery complexity of how do I keep living if I can't live as a prostitute? Not the guy on the street of Detroit, like how do I keep
feeding my family of 4 young kids and my wife and keeping them housed if I'm not selling crack.
Yep.
And we
or a same-sex couple who has an adopted child, and they're like, okay, we're gonna
totally, yeah,
we're the only source of income for this child, and they're okay. So that's a command that carries a lot of implications.
So when we move to the conversation around sexuality, we can dream up all of these scenarios that we feel like the ask might be to the guy who's same-sex attracted. We believe you're going to be lonely for the rest of your life. You have a craving for a relationship, and we believe that's a no. To the family of 2 gay people married together with kids, what's the ask? Does God hate divorce, or does God hate homosexuality? Like,
yep.
You can't have it both ways there. Like the soul.
They're like, oh, it wasn't a real marriage in the first place.
Yeah,
the arguments.
But it is a fracture of a family.
It is.
And it affects a couple of kids potentially that need to know that Jesus loves them too. So there is, you can have a right or wrong view of it. And we wrestled with that. Like the hard part of this text is the words are complicated. Like figuring out what exactly Paul meant has its challenges, but there's also stuff he doesn't say. He comes from a Jewish framework of original design, a man and a woman, and that's talked about by Jesus. And Paul,
he upholds that.
Paul
strongly.
never ever says, yeah, that doesn't really apply anymore. Never really says, like, if you are looking for permission to say it's all okay, this passage doesn't give it to us.
Yeah, this text doesn't offer that.
It does. It does keep it broad. It does say no to the word in Greek is porneia, to the sexually immoral, to the pornography viewer, to the swindler, to the greedy. You're just as implicated in this problem as to the homosexual, to the whatever. Like it's broad. Mm-hmm. But it's not a text that would land you saying, yeah, it's okay, doesn't matter. Like, just do whatever you want with whoever you want.
It's not that big a deal. It's so, okay. We just threw a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And I'm sure, like, depending on where you are in this issue currently, maybe you're just wrestling. You don't know what to think, and you're listening to this episode, and you're like, help me process that. Maybe some of you are like, oh, you guys are not saying enough.
Yeah.
Or you're about this issue, you're not being strong enough and adamant enough about the moral standard, the ethic. And then there may be others who say, no, you're going too far. That's kind of how this text feels. Mm-hmm. So what do we do from here with a passage like this? What's the invitations of this text?
So I think for me, like, I am very comfortable with my sense that original design is central to Scripture as a story. God created this design for humanity, and He's calling people back to it. And He's doing it confidently, knowing that it is the best way for us. Like that's just my reading of the whole story. Mm-hmm. Like that's Adam and Eve is the first human story. It gets very fractured, but there's a calling back constantly to that. What I think is fascinating to me is, where do people encounter Jesus in that story? And where is it our job to try and decide everything that's right or wrong and give instruction on how to live as they are trying to experience Jesus in that story? So we have people that connect with South that hover in all sorts of places on ethical issues. We have people that have been through divorce and sit in our community sharing a house but are not married. And we work alongside those people and gradually allow Jesus to connect with them, shepherd them through to a good resolution. We have people in this community that have same-sex attraction and have decided to be celibate. And we watch as God helps them journey through loneliness and singleness. We have people that would love to be married and aren't. People that are married and would love not to be married. We have people that have gone through all sorts of different things. We have people that have decidedly said, I don't feel like God is good because of what I've experienced, but I want my kids to learn about Him because I feel like they need Him. Like, there's so much complexity here. So to me, and that should be any church in my mind, like any church should be able to provide that point of of wrestling. So my question becomes, what's our end game? Like, I want to have a place where people can come and encounter Jesus. And what I feel the church's first port of call has been is to say, when you arrive, quickly, we want to know about your sex life. And we want you to figure that out first, because that's visible and a high value to us. So much that we would say 98% of us can lock into it, that over the divinity of Jesus. Like, that's been our MO. Like, what's going on there? Like, what happens in your bedroom? Who's invited there? Why are they invited there? What do you do there? Like, that feels like where we go. And the other passage, that's why I didn't wrestle that much until this week, actually, with greed and swindling and all those different things that Paul mentions as just as detrimental to life in his kingdom.
Yeah, we could easily maybe like a comical way of like expressing how maybe we should approach some of those if we were going to be consistent with the list would be someone walks in, they're like, yeah, I want to become part of this community. And you're like, all right, pull up your bank statement.
Yeah.
Let's see where your money goes and whether it's aligned with the kingdom of God.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if not, you can't serve in our kids ministry.
Open the books on your business. Let's see like where it's like treats people ethically, where it doesn't treat people ethically.
So counter argument to that, they say, well, yeah, but Paul does seem to elevate this one in a couple different ways. And it does, like he talks about, like you're sinning against your body and all these sorts of things. So, and even your opening conversation about this does seem kind of like a big deal.
Yeah.
To some extent. So what do we do with that? And then there is a fear, I think, centered around this conversation around the social implications, the societal implications of some of these things. So what I feel is interesting is like, so somewhere Paul's language to me, complicated, and if this loses you, stick with us, because hopefully we'll get somewhere. So Paul Please don't misquote little tiny sections of this conversation, because that could go poorly.
That could go for yeah, really good. So Paul very much interested in the body and how it relates to humanity. Greeks not very interested in that. Romans not very interested in that. Whole bunch of people that are like, you can do whatever you want to your body, and it's fine. It's just going to disappear one day. And so it's like the same. It's actually been really present in evangelical Christianity in the 21st century as well. Jesus is going to come back one day. Everything's going to get destroyed. We can mistreat the earth. We can mistreat ourselves. I can eat whatever I want. I can put on hundreds of pounds, and eventually it doesn't matter.
Burn the fossil fuels like crazy, because the original mandate to humanity, one of the very first mandates to humanity to care for the earth,
subjugated.
Irrelevant. It's all burning anyway.
Yep. So that philosophy of who you sleep with won't affect you was very Greek and very not Jewish. So Paul seems to suggest the difference between these list of 10 things that he gives. And to a Jewish person reading, there's probably like a ding, 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 10.
Totally.
10 commandments, now 10 of these things. Like, that's got to have some connection somewhere. Not for today, probably. But 5 of them are sexual, 5 of them aren't sexual. And then he says, flee from the sexual ones. Be particularly keen to get away from them. Not because God thinks they're worse. I don't think he ever says that. That wouldn't be my reading anyway. If you have a different view, I don't think he ever says they're worse in terms of like the cosmic, but they are long lasting. So whereas you can swindle people, and it seems according to Paul, you can stop, and the effects stop there. Like you move on, and you can make that change.
Yep. Like
he seems to suggest that somewhere what you've done to your body, it lingers long after that. There's scars. There's a problem with sins against the body that are longer lasting.
Yeah, and I think that if you think about it logically, that shows to be true in the sense that there's usually some relational involvement.
Totally.
If there's kids involved, if there seems to be more tentacles to affect the well-being of people in a sexual relationship than some of the other things in the list, that it just has more implications to it. And if you don't I've talked to some people who before meeting Jesus had just slept around insanely. And if you ask them, no, like, be honest with me, do you still feel some measure of tie or connection or imagination in those other relationships? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm shattered.
Yeah, totally.
And people, I've even had that conversation with people who are saying, no, that was fine. And then I dig a little deeper, and they're like, no, every relationship that I've been in after has been affected by the one previous, primarily because of the intimate moments.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh,
there's a visuality to it that locks in your brain, and there's a connection to it that locks in your body that can't just. And that's why, I mean, working with teenagers for years, like I would work with these 14, 15-year-olds that had slept with someone for the first time, and still, like, years later, are still processing, oh man, I can't forget that. That now, modern psychology would say that's church guilt that's leading them to that. Church theology would say modern psychology is wrong about that, and that's inherent to who we are as humans.
Yeah, that there is and I would even venture I will call this hypothetical theology. This is not at all. This is not in the textbook.
If you are, by listening, you have agreed you will not leave the church based on this statement that Aaron's about to make.
This prerequisite is huge. I wonder, with all of the research taking place in quantum entanglement,
oh man,
that there is something, and you could go down that rabbit hole. I don't know. This is totally hypothetical, but there is quantum physics actually has all of these things that they're starting to observe with quantum entanglement in a particle. One particle interacts with the other particle, and then they're internally entangled without some other variable involved, in where you interact with one and inexplicably, like, you ask quantum physicists, they have no idea why
it happens.
This is happening. And so the particles of our bodies, there's something maybe there where God knows that the very stuff of his creation is intertwined in ways that we can't comprehend. I tend to think that some of that has to do with how he created the world, science that we haven't discovered yet, and the spiritual dimension, and all these things. Again, all that's in the category of hypothetical theology.
We see like
something.
And we see the effect of, and this is where I think Paul lands. I've seen the effect of what it is for a guy on the phone to call up someone and say, oh yeah, we're doing this business opportunity, you can buy this for however many hundreds of dollars, and they've called some sweet person, and this guy or lady have opened their checkbook and written a check, or they've got their bank card out or their social security card out, and you see the effects of that. That is traumatic. It doesn't, in my opinion, begin to touch on some of the effects of, I had a friend back in a different place who their first child came because a guy broke into a house and raped her, and they kept the child. They went through all those processes, but the long-lasting effect of the brokenness that can come with an assault on the body seems to be longer. Like that, there's implications that stretch farther into the future. There's a memory of it, a sense of self-hatred, and we saw that in that little bit of a story with Amnon and Tamar. That even for the guy that did it, even for the guy that was the guilty one, that has no excuse.
There's actually like all these weird studies about, go dark here, but these perpetrators who tend to rape, it progresses from rape to eventually murder, partially because it doesn't satisfy, and then there's so much guilt and shame. And these are people who think it's fine. So,
but there's
something there.
Trauma there that we're kind of. Yeah, we don't understand why, but somewhere that seems to be the answer to why Paul says, just be careful with yourself. Like, just look after this body because it matters. And the church has kind of said casually over the years, no, it doesn't really matter. I think that's at least been the implication in some of our teachings.
Okay, so for some people out there listening, they might be thinking, I feel like you're speaking out of both sides of your tongue. We're supposed to, it really matters. We need to uphold this really high standard ethically, and yet we're making too big of a deal out of it.
And that's what I said. That's part of what's made me wonder: do we make too big of a deal out of it? I think the wrestling for me was I've tried to make it minor at times, and I've wondered if it is. So I think maybe that's where I started the whole thing. I'm like, maybe this is more major than I think it is, and yet that doesn't mean that I don't need to recognize the woman caught in adultery story changes hinged on her experiencing Jesus. And that there's always the potential that my involvement in the story stops people ever getting to that point, and how to deal with that and how to create space for that change to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's my just wondering and questioning there. So my feeling is like Paul's major point here, and I think this is what we tried not to lose this Sunday, is not around those two words. It's not around one action or one type of relationship. It's around brokenness. And that's where, and this is what I love about Paul. He almost, even when he's at his most sharp and most like determined to pinpoint the problem, he almost never ends without hope. That's pretty rare for him. So like what he says to them is this is what some of you were. And the implication is that there's always an invite to be one of that group, to move into some better way to live that might be hard to determine at times, but there's always that invitation to keep moving towards it and to keep longing for it. And I think that like, so his language to me is that we're all broken in some way, and we're all invited into wholeness through Jesus' brokenness. Like that's the big grand story. And yet in this place of brokenness, we so often throw rocks at people that are broken differently. And we so often, we're the cause of, that's the Amnon story, we're the cause of brokenness in others. And what fascinated me with this, grabbed me just as a like pop culture reference. Tamar calls Amnon a fool. He's like, you're going to be the biggest fool in Israel. This is how you're going to be known. And there's this super poignant moment in this kind of cheesy movie. It's called Love Actually. So it's a British movie at Christmas time, set around all of these different stories. There's one that has what some people have described as the greatest piece of acting they've ever seen. And it's Emma Thompson, the actress. And her character is this, she's married, couple of kids. She's in her 40s now. They're in like late elementary, early middle school. And her husband's trying to have an affair with his receptionist. And she goes to him and she says, so what would you do if you were in my situation? Would you stick around till you figured out whether it was like a gift that you'd given her and nothing else, or whether it was a gift you'd given her in sex, or worse, whether it was a gift you'd given this other woman in love, because she finds out because he's bought this gift for her. Like, would you stick around and wait, or would you just decide, this is too broken, I'm getting out of here? And he looks at her and he says, I've been a classic fool. And he's been an idiot. He's been Amnon or some version of him. And then there's this moment where she replies, yes, but you also made a fool out of me and made the life I live foolish too. Like there's this action has brought the whole of her world crashing down, and everything she's invested in for decades, it is now on the verge of crumbling because of one person's action. And I think that's some of where Paul goes with some of this language around sexuality and our actions towards other people. There are things that we can do, rocks we can pull out of walls that look stable, that collapse the whole thing. It's like a Jenga tower.
Yeah.
You can move a thing and the whole thing collapses on itself.
Yeah.
And just the poignance of, yes, and you've made my life foolish too.
So this, like, I think the part of what I hear you saying is this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And yet, what you opened up this conversation with, Jesus has this ability to encounter people and say some of the most challenging, life-altering, life-changing ethical challenges to them while still making them feel deeply seen, deeply loved, deeply acknowledged. And I think one of the reasons he's able to do that is because of his statement at the end when he goes to his ascension. He says, I will be with you always. And this eternal commitment to love and to pursue and to nurture every single person's journey along the path of growing in wholeness, he's always present. He's challenging sometimes in my own life, infuriatingly so, but he's there. And he's not just like making this like blanket moral statement and then like writing off a whole subset of society and then ditching this place, which is what a lot of the church has done. And that's, I think that's a travesty. Yeah. Instead, he says, here's a pathway that's, and I know, well, before you freak out, I'm going to walk with you all along the journey. And maybe this subject is too big for you right now.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about this other subject because that one's too close to home. Let's journey on this subject for a while and we'll grow in that area. And then maybe I'll broach this subject again with you later in life as you've matured or grown or trust me more, or on and on and on.
So I think, and I think there's a couple of things we can do to help those conversations. Oh, yeah, seriously, I do not know.
Like I just said, I don't know how to respond to that.
So I think there's a couple of things that I think we get to do. So I think we get an honest moment of reflection as people that follow Jesus to say we have definite determinations as to what God will speak to someone on and in what order. Yeah. And learning to surrender that is actually a key thing. Like Jesus will pull people towards him. He said, if I'm lifted up, I'll pull all people to myself and he will bring transformation. And I think that is so key for us to know. I have seen God move in my life and in other people's lives in areas that don't to me seem like the highest priority. And yet, for whatever reason, seem to him to be the priority right now. So just being aware of that tension is good for us as followers of Jesus. Totally. I think there's this beautiful honesty that we can have with people where we say, wherever you are, we don't know what God is going to take off you or ask you for, but know that Jesus has asked some hard stuff from people. He's never very shy about saying the way of following me is costly and painful. There are people that have left homes. There's people, and we wrestle with this in a different way in the 21st century, but the guy I wrote my thesis on, William Carey, left his wife in England with 3 kids, or tried to, or thought he was going to, and then finally she went with him, but he was like, this is what I'm called to do. Like, I mean, to him, he was like, I'm doing the right thing. Now, we could have a whole session on him, but the way of Jesus has cost people. It's cost people their lives. I've just been reading Silence about Japanese Christians in the early part of Japan. People died through torture because of this faith. Like, it can cost. And so I think sometimes we're a little bit like, the modern gospel has become a little bit like, come to Jesus and all your problems will go away. And the reality for these first followers of Jesus is like, come to Jesus and your problems just got started.
Like, you thought it was bad before.
Yeah, like on a cosmic level, everything may be in alignment, but on a earth level, like this can get complicated. Some people that liked you before may not like you anymore. So like, I think there's those two areas. Like, there's the honesty of come and, man, he may ask you for anything. And yet at the same time, recognize for us that are in the room kind of looking and saying, hey, what's God going to work on all these people? Like, we don't know. We don't always have all of the thing. And that Jesus' brilliance is that love. I'm intrigued by that story about the rich young ruler. Because the story is, in just a few words, is a guy comes to Jesus, says, I want to follow you. Jesus says, give all your stuff to the poor and follow me. And the guy goes away very sad because he can't do it. What we're told about Jesus' emotion in that is we're simply told Jesus looked at him and loved him. Now, what we aren't told is the moment he went away, he stopped loving him. What we aren't told is whether he lingered on the fringe and eventually started following Jesus for himself. We're not told whether he went away and never came back. We're not told any of those things. We're left to imagine. And it's not the teaching point of the pericope. The teaching point is you might have to surrender all your wealth to follow Jesus. But I'm just intrigued to sketch it on further.
Yeah.
And no implication in there to me suggests that the moment he said, I can't give that up. Jesus said, love disappeared at that moment. Love died quick. There is this potential, and we see that with characters throughout the New Testament. Like sometimes, Nicodemus seems to lurk on the fringes for a while. And it's not till the crucifixion that he actually makes some decided steps.
Totally.
Like there's space for people on the fringe at different points to consider. And the second century church actually got to that point that they'd grown so fast that they actually kind of challengingly said to people, take a year, consider the teachings of Jesus, like decide if you want to live up to these. And in a year, if you say yes, we'll baptize you and we'll make you a part of the church. Like the whole premise changed from the first century church. They were like, yep, you said yes, we're going to dunk you.
Yeah. I've seen moments where you're just like, yes, I'm gonna encourage obedience to the way of Jesus when he challenges you to obey this issue. I'm gonna encourage you to obey it. And when Jesus challenges you to obey on this particular issue, I'm gonna encourage you to obey that too. But if he's not bringing up that particular issue at that time, like trusting people's journey with Jesus rather than with us individually saying, well, this one feels weird to me, so you've got to deal with that one sooner. And some of those things are complicated. So it maybe makes some sense that we're going a little bit long in this episode, but there seems to be, we started this out like, why has this become such a big deal? And I think it'd be helpful maybe to paint a few short pictures of on both sides of this argument, whether you're hoping that the Christian faith is more open to different sexual challenges.
Wow, yeah.
Or whether you're on the side where you want it to be more clear and precise and no, this is bad, this is good, so whichever side you're on, why do we have this tendency to get so locked in and aggressive about these two things, these two different perspectives?
Yeah, what's the answer?
I have some theories, but I think we're hardwired as in our brains, and this is even you can neurologically, to prefer simple solutions to things. What's the term I'm thinking of? We want simple answers. Our brains are calorie saving machines. We want to know what's good, what's bad, where's the line, how close can I get to the line before I cross the line? Like this is an obsession that's not just individuals. Some people are like that, some people aren't. We're actually neurologically wired towards preferring binary. That's the term I'm looking for. Preferring binary systems. Neurologically, we're wired for binary systems. Because it's easier to categorize. It's easier to make decisions about. It burns fewer calories. All of these sorts of things. And so it's just in our. So for someone who's more, I want to know where the boundary is and just say it. Just like this whole episode may be infuriating to you because we're not just saying this is. We've said it a couple times, and then we kind of said some other things that felt like we were unsaying it, and then we're like, it might be infuriating. That's your brain trying to categorize what's right, what's wrong, where's the boundary, where's not the boundary, and then vice versa. If you're like struggling with this and you're trying to say, I want to figure out how to find a church that's affirming of me and all those sorts of things, you want to just take this issue and you're still pursuing a binary system, and just acknowledging that that's deeply human. And I think it's part of our brokenness as humans to prefer to simplify things that are complex. And all the stories you told from the Bible are very complex stories. And
they always are.
We wish that these texts were super crystal clear on these different things. But the reality is, if we're dealing with humans, when was the last relationship that you had that was just crazy easy? Everything about it was super duper simple. It's just not a thing. I think that's one of the reasons why we tend to polarize, is because it takes more energy, and I would call it kingdom energy, soul, spirit, growth, mature energy, to retain the complexity of love and ethical standard at the same time. And gosh, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think we tend to have a nostalgic look back at what we might broadly categorize as biblical times and say, well, it was simple then, wasn't it? And I think we miss the complexity within the stories then. Because we got it in black and white in front of us, and so we take that and we're like, oh, look, it's black and white. But as soon as you start to place yourself in the story, it quickly gets complex.
If you read about Corinth, suddenly the simplicity's gone, right?
Yeah, like the woman caught in adultery that we've talked about. Like, what happened to the guy? Like, why was there a guy? Why isn't he stood there in front of Jesus? Where did she live? Like, how did she make her money? What happens after she decided to stop doing all the things that Jesus said was sin? What did he mean when he said, go away and sin no more? Like, was he talking only about that thing? Were there other things as well? Like, where does the story go? Even for the first followers of Jesus, like, Peter seems like he was probably married. Like, in actual fact, it says he's got a mother-in-law, so he certainly was married.
Yeah.
Like, while he's traveling around with Jesus, what's happening to his wife? Like,
why is he neglecting her?
Like, yeah. Where's the family? What's going? Like, as soon as you put yourself in the stories, it gets complex. And so what we get beautifully with Corinthians is Paul wrestling with this. Like, over the next few weeks, we're looking at, like, you are free. For freedom, Christ made you free. And then there's these things. Like, and that's the Corinthian church's struggle. Like, I thought we were supposed to be free. And Paul's like, you are. But
everything's permissible.
Not everything's beneficial.
Oh,
like it's a
that's
wrestling.
so complicated.
It's
what
so
do you mean, Paul?
Yeah, it's so complex. And so Will, I think you're right. I think you're right about the binary. It means that we tend to go to passages or lock into passages as our memorized texts that seem like they're more binary. And then there's these other ones that, like, what does Paul mean when he says to the Greeks I became a Greek, to the the Romans I became Roman, to the like he's doing all of these different connection points. He's at times taking elements of their society. What he doesn't do when he goes to Athens is say, you've got a statue of an unknown god, burn it down or smash it to bits. Like, we're going to get rid of that thing today. Mm-hmm. He says, the thing that you worship as unknown, I'm going to reveal to you as known.
Yeah.
Like, can he see one day where the Athenians as a whole state or whole city pull down their false gods? Absolutely. Is it his big argument for what should happen today? It's not. Like, it's fascinating how this guy...
He doesn't say, rip that one down and rip that one down and rip that one down. Like, wow, is he slacking off? He's not theologically strong enough on this issue.
Just like, there's all of this wrestling with how do you clear the pathway for people to experience Jesus? Because at no point, it seems to me, in history has behavior changed because people legislated it. Like, a great example of that is prohibition. We went through a phase where we said, like, society-wise, we need to get rid of strong liquor. And I think at some point over here, it was any alcohol, right?
Yeah.
This is a scourge on society. I don't know enough about American history to know, was that a Bible thing or a faith thing, or was it just a societal thing? But whatever, that becomes the drive. We're a Puritan nation in our history. We've got to get rid of all this stuff. And all it does is it goes undercover. It goes subterranean, and suddenly stronger liquor that's unregulated has been drunk by people. So, like, there's actually this beautiful Simpsons episode where they find out, like, Springfield bought in Prohibition in, like, 1918 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, we're going to go back to Prohibition. So they do. And then it's only at the end of the episode somebody reads the next line on the parchment that says the law that we brought in 19 was repealed in 20 because it just didn't work. We long to legislate for people. And it doesn't seem like it works. The only thing that the Bible talks about is transforming, is coming into relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, it's a whole life transformation thing that produces better, more beautiful ethical outcomes.
Yeah.
It's not rules, regulations, binary, this bad, this good. That's a system that actually intends to, in human beings, create defensiveness and more hostility and all of this.
So I think I'd finish with this story that always has helped me. It's not about a particular sexual preference or anything like that. It's actually about a couple that a friend of mine was pastoring a church, and this young couple, church full of gray hairs, beautiful group of people, and and this younger couple comes in, and they look different to most people in the room, and they start interacting. And the guy I knew, who was the lead pastor, he grabbed his other leaders and he said, these couple, they're living together, they're not married. None of you says a word to them. Like, if any of you says anything, I will persecute you personally. You just keep quiet. And so for about 6 months, they engaged with the community, both made like a commitment to follow Jesus. And he said they were over for dinner one night, and in the middle of the meal, one of them said, like, can we ask you a question? We've been reading the Bible together, and it seems like the Bible says if we're supposed to be married, like if we're sleeping together, we should be married. Like, is that right? And he's like, well, actually, yeah, like the Bible's viewpoint is you should be married. And they're like, looked at each other, and the one said to the other, well, I love you. Do you love me? And the other one said, yeah. And like, do you want to get married? And like, yeah. And they didn't do the wedding right there, but that was the story. Now, beautiful story. So we get to celebrate that and recognize those are the types of things we can expect to see in a Jesus community.
Yeah.
But we also get to acknowledge the complexity. That if those were two people of the same gender that were reading the text, if they'd come to like this conclusion of like this is something that's never accepted, then after years of relationship, the only conclusion that they can come to is one of us is supposed to move out, we're supposed to split up, and our lives change completely. For that first couple, there wasn't much change really. There was a ceremony.
Yep.
So the second thing, we can look at the text and be intellectually honest and say that would be the right decision for them to make, maybe. But we should also be able to look at it emotionally and say that there are two human beings that have, to a certain degree, felt knit together in relationship. And now there's a tearing apart.
Yeah.
And there's a loss there as well. There's a heartbreak there as well.
Yep.
And that's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so there's some... if you're curious, if you want to know more, there's some great resources. There's some good work on the subject, and there's more to learn.
I think a great push would be read something you don't agree with.
Yeah,
like go and find a book. Like if you are very much in a sort of belief that the Bible lands on original design, man and a woman, and that's the only option. Go and read something like Love is an Orientation or something like that. You'll probably disagree with 90% of it, and that's okay.
Yeah, so here's an admonition that I will repeat from Sunday where you preached. One of the things you said as a recommendation is, say, before you go to making snap judgments, have a relationship.
Yeah.
Do you know anyone?
Yeah.
Do you know their story? Do you know? So if that's you, that's one recommendation, is to say, okay, let's slow your roll on the snap judgments, on the really binary statements, whatever, until you can build some relationship. And then if you're on the other side of that, if you are increasingly trying to find a place where the way of Jesus never challenges you to change anything about your life, then you are no longer going to a Christian church.
Yeah.
Because that's not the church I go to, and I'm a heterosexual monogamous man. Yet the way of Jesus continually challenges me and stuff. And so and then both of those camps, like, you've got to find a place where you're in a relationship with Jesus that's dynamic and challenging enough, or that challenges you either to love more in an uncomfortable way or to sacrifice in some uncomfortable ways. And that's just part of walking with Jesus. Yeah,
and if you're on the more liberal side, like, read some commentaries around texts like this that demand intellectual wrestling with the text, because some of those commentaries will say that one of the arguments about passages like this has been Paul didn't understand that there were monogamous homosexual relationships as a possibility. Yeah, there were those relationships back then as well. Like, that isn't a brand new thing for society. They existed, especially for upper class Greeks and Romans. Like, there's for every one of us more wrestling to do.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
And the safest place to be is with Jesus in the process.
Totally. Yes.
Because he has a way of figuring all that mess out.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in. If you have questions, if you want more resources, reach out and we can maybe send some book recommendations or something in the comments section. We'll leave that to the comment section. We were not going to do it unless you reach out and ask for those.
Yes.
Another podcast maybe that would be Theology in the Raw is one that addresses this issue quite a bit. He's done a lot of work in this area. The host of that show.
I would say there's a book. Nancy Piercy has a book called Love Thy Body, which is pretty broad across all different aspects of sexuality. It leans more conservative, maybe. That was really helpful for me.
Yep.
That would be a great option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're still wrestling and figuring it out. And
see you guys.
thanks for
Have a
tuning
great
in.
week.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye.